looks delicious. Well, if you're a parent, then you're probably all too familiar with techno guilt. It's what you might feel when your child prefers to play Minecraft and build a fort with their friends, and of course when they pull the techno tantrum when you try to take the iPad away. These days there are just so many myths and conceptions when it comes to raising kids in the digital world, and many parents feel like they're failing to raise healthy kids. But luckily, here to fight that battle head-on is children's technology and development expert, Dr Kristy Goodwin. Kristy, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Now, okay, the first question I want to ask you is one that's on every parent's lips, I'm sure. Let's dispel the myth once and for all. How much screen time is okay?
Look, that really is the million-dollar question,
Yeah.
and I wish I had a really simple, straightforward, quantitative number I could give you, but unfortunately I can't. We do have government guidelines that give sort of a rough estimate as to how much screen time kids could have, and the recommendations say that for 0 to 2-year-olds they shouldn't have any screen time. So, you know, you're supposed to tear them away from the iPad and blindfold them when the TV's playing.
Yeah.
For 2 to 5-year-olds it's about 1 hour a day, and for 5 to 17-year-olds it's no more than 2 hours of entertainment media a day, so that doesn't include their time at screens. However, those guidelines are not only, I can see some of you here panicking,
Yeah.
I can feel the tension and the evil looks, they're unrealistic, and what I say is that focusing purely on how much is not the most important question. It is, particularly if it's displacing kids' developmental priorities, but we need to look at the bigger picture. What are they doing with the screen? When are they using it? You know, what times of the day? That can be problematic.
So it's what they're watching.
What they're watching, playing or creating. When, you know, we know that it can have a huge impact on the quality and quantity of children's sleep and naps if they're still napping. We know it can cause attentional issues in the classroom if they're watching rapid-fire, fast-paced action before school. So there are so many nuances that we need to consider beyond just the how much. I think all kids have unique tipping points. You know, we can't prescribe an amount of screen time simply based on a child's chronological age. We need to look at the bigger picture. So I think we can have rough estimates. What I say to parents is look at and make sure that their screen time isn't derailing or displacing their basic developmental needs. Are they still playing with their friends? Are they socialising? Are they sleeping? Are they building real relationships? If those basic needs are being met, then we don't need to have the techno shame and techno guilt about screen time because it's not harming their development. The problem is when it shifts the other way and those basic needs are being displaced by screens, and that's when
That's the issue.
problem.
Yeah.
So what you're saying, because I have a 2-year-old, right? When he was born, not long after our TV broke down, and we basically got to the point where we're like, we're not replacing this TV, we're not going to have TV in the homes at all because of this whole techno guilt, right? And then the phones come on, and occasionally we put on like a 30-minute show or 15-minute show, and goodness, the times when it goes on, the guilt in my heart. I'm just like, oh, I'm the worst mother ever. You think that that's not too bad?
It's not. You know, if we have firm boundaries, you know, if he was to play or your child was to play on it for hours and hours and revert to it all the time, it could be problematic. But having firm boundaries and finding age-appropriate content, you know, if they're watching age-appropriate content, kids can actually learn from screens. And that's one of the myths I like to dispel. The research tells us that if kids are using age-appropriate technologies in intentional ways, they can actually benefit from it. So it's not all toxic and taboo for them. I think we need to ditch that. And I know I grew up, I watched television occasionally, and I asked my mum, was she riddled with techno guilt? And she assures me that she wasn't. So I think this is because there's new technologies, and obviously it's more accessible for them, so there's more opportunities for them to revert to it. We're often seeing a lot more kids today throw techno tantrums.
Oh my goodness.
We can talk about that. And there's nothing wrong with kids. We actually know it's a typical neurobiological response when they're emotionally combusting, when we ask for our iPhone back or try and pry the TV remote control from their tight grip. So I think that the technology is evolving, and as parents we're sort of trying to figure out how to navigate this landscape, often with a lot of conflicting and confusing advice along the way.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned it's really important to set strict boundaries, and I totally agree, but at the moment it's holidays, right? All the kids are not at school at the moment. So should we, as parents, sort of be lax and let them have more screen time? Is that a bad thing to do?
Not necessarily. I know many families have more relaxed technology rules and boundaries during holidays, but I think we need to clearly articulate what those boundaries are in advance before the iPad is switched on or the gaming consoles in their hands. It is too difficult to try and negotiate. One of the reasons we know is that when kids use technology, the reason that you get, I call it the digital zombie, you know, when you try and gain their attention, you could be running around around on fire in the background and they're completely oblivious to what they're doing.
That sounds like my husband.
Yeah. well, it's no accident because technology developers and app developers have worked to get your kids or your husband, in this instance, into what we call the state of flow. We become so engrossed in and enraptured with what we're doing. So I think if we're going to have boundaries, we need boundaries around what they can play, access or watch, when they can watch and access it, and also how. And I often say to parents, particularly if you've got kids under 8, giving them an amount of time is often a redundant exercise because they often don't have a conceptual understanding of what half an hour is or an hour. So we're much better off just to give them quantities. And even if kids do understand time, you know, quantities of episodes or YouTube clips or the level they can get to in the game are much more precise and tangible for them. And you're much less likely, I don't promise you won't get it, but you're less likely to get that emotional eruption at the end.
Yeah, so how did you manage it with your kids? You've got an 8-year-old and a
5-year-old and another one.
Congratulations, by the way.
Letting me know it's here. We use screens. So I say to parents, plan technology, don't ban it. If we digitally amputate our kids, if we, tell them that it's the forbidden fruit, we drive the behaviour underground. And whether we love it or loathe it, our kids are going to inherit a digital future. So what we need to do as parents is to teach kids how to use it in healthy and helpful ways, and therefore how to mitigate some of the negative effects as well.
I heard something interesting. It seems like you weren't always an advocate for screen time in that sense. Like, apparently you used to be a no screen time kind of mum as well?
Not necessarily. I fell into this work purely accidentally. I wish I had a very clear career trajectory mapped out, but I didn't. I was a teacher and an academic who looked at the research on technology and kids. And then I experienced life's greatest equaliser and I became a mum for the first time. And I'd taken my son for his developmental check with the paediatrician, got the all clear, but I was the A-type nervous first-time mum and worried the paediatrician may have missed something. My second son completely forgot his 6 and 12-month developmental check. I'm declaring that on TV. But I took my first son back to the local healthcare clinic nurse to do the 6-month developmental check, and she asked me all the regular questions, and then she turned and asked me what screen time he was having. And I thought, as a researcher in this field, she was just checking that I walked my talk. And I said, well, nothing. And she leaned forward a little more and she wagged her finger and did the skippy sound and did the whole and proceeded to tell me that my son would fall behind at 6 months of age if he wasn't watching particular educational DVDs and learning colours and shapes on the iPad.
Wow.
Now, I was flabbergasted, hadn't been caffeinated, couldn't come up with a coherent response, but I left that clinic appointment and I went home and ironically, I started a social media campaign that babies need laps, not apps.
Yep.
It went viral. And at the same time, I thought I need to write a book about this because this is such a confusing and conflicting topic. There are so many myths and misconceptions that parents are given, and we're all trying to figure this out. So yes, screens can be beneficial if they're introduced at the right time, and dunking kids in the digital stream prematurely before their brain is able to cope with it can be a problem.
And so what age would that be?
Look, our government says 2 years. I look at the neuroscience, and the neuroscience tells us that kids actually can't make meaning from a 2D screen until they're about 18 months of age. So the American Academy of Paediatrics have said from about 18 months of age you can use screens and kids can actually learn from them. Before that, it's not to say don't use it, but don't use it under the false impression that you're preparing them for Harvard, because that is not what you are doing. If you need to have a shower or if you need 5 minutes of solace, then certainly pop them on in front of something, but don't do it under the guise that it's educational. I think we're often misled.
That's what some parents do, use the TV screens or the screen as a babysitting tool, which, so how do you get into that fine line between using it as a babysitting tool and using it for the purpose of the child education and learning and being up to date with technology?
Yeah, it's a really tricky landscape because one of the problems is the technology is evolving constantly. Just when we get a handle over our latest child's digital infatuation, along comes something else to supersede it. So this is something parents are really grappling with. When it comes to using technology as the babysitter, I know many of us, and I admit, I have done it from time to time, but we need to be careful about using that as our standard operating procedure, because we start to develop habits of dependency and our kids will very quickly associate boredom with a screen or feeling frustrated and angry. And so what we're actually seeing is that kids are actually seeking solace in screens. They're using the screen to self-soothe. And I think if we were really reflective, a lot of us do that as adults, and it's not necessarily helpful for our kids.
Yeah, Kristy, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Unfortunately, I have to stop there, but I would love to ask you more questions. But yeah, thank you for joining us. questions.
Pleasure.
All very interesting and very relevant. If you'd like to learn more or listen to Dr. Kristy's wonderful advice or buy her book, make sure you visit her website, kristygoodwin.com.